You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
Five brothers at Camp Timber Hollow stumble across something hidden deep in the forbidden woods. An old, forgotten cabin with secrets better left undiscovered. What begins as a thrilling midnight adventure soon spirals into terror as they realize they're not alone. Something sinister lurks inside. Something that knows their names, their faces, and their deepest fears. As reality twists and shadows whisper, the boys must race against time to escape before becoming another forgotten story whispered around the campfire. But escaping the darkness isn't as simple as running away. Some nightmares linger, patiently waiting for another chance. If you dare uncover secrets that should remain buried, subscribe to Soul Studios now and hit the bell to ensure you never miss a single bone-chilling story. A lonely cabin stands in the middle of a dark forest at night, its windows flickering faintly with an eerie light. Hudson stepped carefully along the moonlit trail, gravel crunching under each tentative footstep. The late summer night at Camp Timber Hollow was thick with the chorus of crickets and the whisper of a distant breeze through pine boughs. In the darkness, the familiar campgrounds felt untamed and alien, as if the forest had crept closer once the lanterns were doused. Hudson was returning alone from a midnight restroom run, flashlight beam bouncing off twisted tree roots, when something unsettling caught his eye. Through the dense thicket to his left, he noticed a dim orange glow flitting between the trunks, like a lantern swaying in the depths of the off-limits woods. He paused, heart quickening. Camp rules forbid venturing beyond the marked trails at night, but curiosity gnawed at him. Who would be out there? He wondered. Perhaps a counselor making rounds, or another camper sneaking into the forest. Yet the light moved too strangely, gliding, then vanishing, only to reappear deeper in the grove. A soft crack of branches and a distant childlike giggle drifted through the night air, so faint that Hudson questioned if he heard it at all. A chill skittered up his spine. The sensible part of his mind urged him to hurry back to the brothers' cabin, to safety and sleep. But something about that glow beckoned him. It felt like a silent invitation or a dare. Swallowing against a dry throat, Hudson made a snap decision. He would gather his brothers. If someone was out there in trouble, or if a secret adventure awaited, they needed to know. Within minutes, the 5 brothers were huddled together outside their bunks. Brayden, the eldest at 17, tried to project calm authority even as his eyes stayed fixed on the dark trees. Easton, 15, masked his excitement with a veneer of skepticism. Hudson, 13, was wide-eyed and tingling with a mix of fear and curiosity. Landen, 12, bit his lip, determined not to show how scared he truly was, and little Nolan, only 10, clutched a flashlight in both hands, knuckles pale. They whispered urgently beneath the broken moonlight. When Hudson described the wandering light and strange laughter, their initial annoyance at being woken turned to captivation and dread. Against their better judgment and spurred on by the thrill of a midnight mystery, the brothers agreed to investigate together. With Brayden leading, they slipped past the darkened cabins and into the tree line, guided by the intermittent glow in the distance. Twigs snapped underfoot as they ventured deeper, every rustle in the underbrush causing the group to flinch and exchange nervous glances. The comforting smells of campfire smoke and toasted marshmallows had long faded, replaced by the damp scent of moss and decaying leaves. As the light drew them onward, an oppressive silence fell over the forest. The chirping insects grew still, as if the woods were holding its breath. Easton cleared his throat to whisper a joke about how this was probably just a counselor playing a prank, but his quivering voice betrayed him. No one responded. In unspoken agreement, they pressed on, hearts pounding, each brother keenly aware that they were far beyond the camp's familiar paths now. Suddenly, Brayden halted, raising a hand to stop the line. The glow had disappeared. In its place loomed a shadowy structure barely visible between tangled oaks and maples. Nolan's breath hitched. Before them stood a small cabin, hidden deep in the forest where no buildings should be. Its log walls were cloaked in vines and years of neglect. One window hung ajar, and through the smeared glass they glimpsed a faint flicker of light within, the same ghostly orange glow that led them here. A battered wooden door creaked on one hinge, as if beckoning them inside. For a long moment, none of the brothers moved. They had found the source of the mystery, but standing before it now, every instinct screamed for them to turn and run back to the safety of camp. Yet something, curiosity, fate, or that almost magnetic pull of the unknown, kept them rooted in place, staring at the lost cabin in the woods. Brayden exhaled slowly, trying to project confidence for his younger siblings, even as his stomach knotted with unease. As the oldest, he felt responsible for keeping everyone safe. "All right," he murmured, forcing steadiness into his voice. "We take a quick look, then head straight back. Stay right behind me." In truth, Brayden's mind raced with worry. This cabin shouldn't exist here. He recalled a campfire tale a counselor once mentioned in passing, a forbidden cabin tied to old disappearance stories. He had laughed it off then, but now his memory tugged eerily at him. Still, he had to appear brave. Easton clenched his flashlight and offered a weak grin. "Probably just an old storage shed or something, right? Maybe we'll find a stash of s'mores," he joked, attempting levity. His quip fell flat, but the effort was appreciated. The familiar teasing helped ground them. Inside, Easton's heart thudded painfully. Ever the skeptic, he struggled to find a logical explanation for the wandering light. Pranks, he told himself, or an overactive imagination. He needed to believe that, for the alternative, that something truly bizarre was unfolding, was too frightening. When no one laughed at his joke, he shrugged and gave Hudson a gentle nudge. "You okay?" he whispered. Hudson nodded jerkily. He'd been the first to see the light, and now guilt for leading his family out here was settling in. His imagination, vivid at the best of times, was now conjuring all manner of terrors lurking in the dark trees around them. But he couldn't back out, not after convincing them to come. "I'm fine," Hudson replied, voice wavering. In truth, his insides felt like ice. With each passing second in front of the cabin, he felt an inexplicable dread growing. He told himself it was just the spooky setting playing tricks. After all, he reasoned, they were a pack of brothers. Nothing could really hurt them if they stuck together. "Right?" Landen put a hand on Nolan's shoulder. The youngest brother hadn't spoken a word since they found the cabin. Nolan's small face was half hidden behind his oversized hoodie, eyes round with fear and wonder. Landen, just 2 years older, felt a surge of protectiveness. "Mus, we don't have to go in if you don't want," Landen whispered. A quiver in his own voice betrayed him. He was scared too, but he wouldn't let anything happen to his kid brother. Nolan swallowed hard and shook his head. "No, I want to stay with you," he whispered back. His fingers tightened around Landen's. Nolan's courage was paper-thin, bolstered only by the presence of his brothers. The dark woods played on his worst fears, the fear of being alone, of monsters in closets and ghosts under the bed, now seemingly come to life in this real abandoned shack. But staying outside alone was even more terrifying, so whatever lay ahead, he'd face it with them. United by a mix of trepidation and determination, the brothers crept forward as one onto the rickety porch. The wooden steps groaned under Brayden's weight, and he winced at the sound, imagining it echoing through the night. Each boy held their breath as Brayden pressed a hand against the cabin's door. With a gentle push, the door swung open inward with a prolonged, keening squeal of rusty hinges. The sound made Nolan whimper softly, and Easton muttered, "Just the wind," though no breeze stirred the heavy summer air. Inside, the single-room cabin was swathed in darkness apart from a strange, dim light emanating from somewhere near the far wall. The air was stale with disuse and something else. A faint rot like old damp wood, and was that a hint of sulfur? The boys shuffled in cautiously, Brayden's arm outstretched to keep the others behind him. The beam of Easton's flashlight danced over cobwebbed rafters and a floor littered with leaves and dirt. The interior looked long abandoned indeed. Crude wooden bunks lined one side, a rusted iron stove on the other. It might have once been a councillor's quarters or a hunter's shack, but what was producing that light? Hudson squinted, stepping forward despite the bile of fear rising in his throat. On a small table against the far wall, an old-fashioned oil lantern flickered weakly, its flame nearly spent. That explained the glow. Relief washed through him in a brief wave of logic. Perhaps a careless hiker had left it lit. Yet even as the thought formed, he knew it made no sense. Who would hike this far into restricted woods and leave an oil lamp burning? As if in answer, the lantern flame abruptly guttered, plunging the cabin into thick darkness apart from the boy's own flashlight. Nolan stifled a yelp and sidled closer to Landen. In the sudden quiet, the brothers could hear each other's breathing, shallow, rapid. "Everyone stay close," Brayden whispered, his voice barely audible. The flashlight beam trembled in Easton's grasp as he swept it across the cabin. The narrow cone of light revealed more details bit by bit. Dusty shelves lined with indistinct shapes, perhaps jars or tools left to rust, a moth-eaten blanket crumpled on one bunk. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the very shadows were watching. Hudson felt the hairs on his arms prickle. The cabin was deathly quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence where every small sound they made seemed magnified. The creak of a floorboard underfoot, Landen's sharp intake of breath when a spider skittered down the wall. As Easton's beam passed over the far corner, Brayden sucked in a breath. "Wait," he hissed. "Go back. Look there." Easton swung the light back reluctantly. The beam fell upon a cluster of yellowed papers, tacked messily to the wall near the extinguished lantern. They hadn't noticed them at first in the flickering light, but now the sight made their blood run cold. They were drawings, dozens of them, crude, childlike sketches scrawled in charcoal and faded watercolor. Easton stepped closer, and the others followed as if in a trance, drawn to the one bit of color in the drab cabin. Brayden plucked one page off the wall with trembling fingers and held it up to the flashlight's glow. It depicted a group of smiling kids around a campfire. The style was rough, but eerily evocative. The campers' faces were drawn with hollow black circles for eyes. Nolan edged behind Landen, his voice tiny. "Who drew those?" No one answered. Hudson's heart thumped as he lifted another drawing. This one showed two boys by the lake holding fishing poles. Their faces, too, were featureless except for dark holes for eyes. A creeping sense of recognition tugged at Hudson's mind. The clothing and hairstyles in the drawings looked dated, like from decades ago. Brayden's breath caught as the same realization dawned on him. "These kids," he muttered, glancing at Easton. "They might be from the old camp stories, the ones who disappeared." His words hung in the musty air. Easton's throat went dry as he recalled more. An old newspaper clipping framed in the camp mess hall, one he'd idly read during a rainy day. 1975, 2 campers vanish. Search continues. Could it be? He compared the drawing's details to the hazy memory of that article's accompanying photo. A shiver rippled through him. The sketch in his hand seemed to depict those very same missing boys by the lake. "This is impossible," he whispered, voice cracking. His rational mind struggled to catch up. Why would someone draw this and leave it here, untouched for years? Landen was examining another picture with trembling hands. It showed a little girl on a swing set, one of the old swings that still stood, rusting, near the camp's entrance. Her face, too, was drawn as an empty, gaping oval. At the bottom of the drawing, in jagged, childish handwriting, a name was written, Sarah, and a year, 1982. Landen's eyes burned with sudden tears of confusion and fear. He didn't know any Sarah from camp. She must have been before their time. "There are names on some," he said hoarsely, pointing. The others saw it too, scribbled first names and dates, 1970, 1975, 1982, 1999. A timeline of lost campers. Nolan's flashlight, largely forgotten in his hand, began to dim and flicker. In the wavering light, the cabin seemed to close in around them. The drawings on the walls fluttered gently, though no breeze was felt. Hudson's voice came out in a strained whisper. We should go, now." He could barely get the words past the lump in his throat. This wasn't an adventure anymore. It was a graveyard of memories, a shrine to the missing. None of the brothers wanted to admit it aloud, but each felt the same uncanny sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching from the dark corners of the room, just beyond the reach of the light. Brayden nodded mutely and took a step back toward the door, trying not to show how shaken he was. As he did, a floorboard groaned loudly underfoot, and from somewhere above came a soft thump, like a footstep in the loft overhead. All five froze, hearts hammering in their chests. Brayden's eyes slowly lifted toward the ceiling. There was a small attic crawl space up there, its hatch door hanging open. Easton pointed the flashlight upward, but the beam vanished into thick darkness. "Probably a raccoon," Easton tried to say, but the words were a whisper that convinced no one. In that taut silence, a new sound emerged, a faint scraping, like nails or fingertips dragging across wood. It came from the cabin's only door, the one they had entered through, now slightly ajar behind them. Landen's head whipped toward the door, his breath caught in his throat. The door, which they'd left open for a quick escape, was now moving, closing ever so slowly. The hinges emitted a plaintive squeal as it inched inward, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Not the wind, Landen realized in dawning horror. The night air outside was utterly still. Someone or something was sealing them in. "Who's there?" Brayden barked, his voice cracking as he spun to face the door. The flashlight beam jittered across the walls. In that same instant, the door slammed shut with explosive force. The bang so loud it jolted dust from the rafters. Nolan screamed. A high, terrified wail that sent the others into motion. Easton lunged for the door, grabbing the knob and wrenching it hard. It wouldn't budge, as if locked or held fast by an invisible grip. He rammed his shoulder against the wood with a desperate grunt. "It's stuck!" he yelled, panic breaking through his usual calm. Hudson stumbled back, nearly tripping over debris, and the flashlight slipped from Easton's hand, clattering to the floor. The beam spun wildly around the cabin, illuminating snapshots of chaos. In that strobing light, the brothers witnessed the impossible. The drawings on the walls were changing. What had been static images of happy campers were now shifting, the ink and charcoal twisting on the page. The children's drawn mouths turned downward in horror, their empty eyes now bleeding out of their faces in inky rivulets. One sketch of the campfire scene showed the kids in it cowering, menaced by a tall, shadowy figure sketched in furious black strokes. Another page fluttered to the floor at Hudson's feet. It bore a new sketch that hadn't been there moments before. 5 stick-figure boys holding hands, drawn with crude precision. 5 figures that looked uncannily like Brayden, Easton, Hudson, Landen, and Nolan. "Oh no," Hudson whimpered, his chest constricting. Landen snatched Nolan into his arms as the youngest sobbed uncontrollably. They had to get out, now. Landen's gaze darted to a small window on the side wall. Without hesitating, he grabbed the rickety wooden stool by the table and hurled it at the glass. The window shattered with a sharp crash, shards raining onto the forest floor outside. Cold night air rushed in. They didn't need to be told twice. The brothers bolted into the forest, adrenaline lending them speed where their legs might otherwise have failed. Behind them, a sound like 1,000 sticks snapping at once tore through the night. Nolan, being carried by Landen, peeked over his brother's shoulder despite himself, and his eyes widened at the sight. The cabin structure was collapsing in on itself, walls buckling as that brilliant orange light seeped through every crack. It wasn't fire, at least not a normal fire, but a pulsating, angry glow. As they fled, the boys heard a final ear-splitting shriek rise from the wreckage. A noise that might have been splintering wood, or the scream of something inhuman caught in a death throe. By the time they flung themselves over a fallen log and dared to look back, an eerie silence had fallen. The clearing was barely visible through the trees, lit only by the wan grey of pre-dawn. Where the cabin once stood was now a pile of smouldering rubble, wisps of smoke curled up into the lightening sky. A few tongues of orange flame licked at the debris, but even those were dying down as if sated. Brayden's chest heaved. He realized he had been holding his breath. There was no sign of the shadowy figure, no stir of unnatural movement. Only the normal breeze rustling the leaves and the distant call of a morning bird, as if the forest itself were sighing in relief. The brothers limped back to camp as the sun edged over the horizon. In the early morning light, they could see the cuts and bruises on each other, proof that it had been real, that it hadn't been just a nightmare. Wordlessly, they returned to their bunks and cleaned up as best they could, inventing a story about exploring and falling into thorn bushes to explain their injuries. None of them slept at all that day. Huddled together in the safety of daylight, they agreed it was best to never speak of the lost cabin or the drawings or the thing they encountered. They feared being disbelieved, or worse, that acknowledging it might somehow call it back. For the remainder of camp, the brothers stuck impenetrably together. At night, a couple of them took turns staying awake on guard, though nothing unusual disturbed the grounds again. The forest seemed calm, indifferent to the terror it had harbored. At summer's end, they returned home, each quietly relieved to leave Timber Hollow behind. The camp closed down soon after, with vague reports citing unsafe old buildings and an unexplained explosion in the woods. Locals whispered that the land was cursed. The brothers, however, knew the truth. They tried to move on with life. They grew up, finished school, started families, normal lives as best they could. For years, none of them returned to those woods. In private moments, they might recall that night in anxious flashes, the fluttering drawings, the ghostly hand on Easton's shoulder, the echo of that door slamming shut on its own. Occasionally, one of them would bolt awake from a nightmare, convinced they heard a whisper or giggle from the shadows. But as time passed, they clung to the hope that whatever evil they had faced was gone forever, buried in the cabin's ashes. Years later, on a crisp October afternoon, Nolan found himself smiling as he watched his own 6-year-old son, Tyler, hop off the school bus with a bundle of art papers clutched in his small hands. Tyler was brimming with excitement about a Halloween drawing he made in class. Nolan knelt in the living room as his boy proudly smoothed out one particular crayon drawing on the coffee table. The smile on Nolan's face froze the instant his eyes fell on it. It was a sketch of a log cabin surrounded by stick-figure trees under a dark scribbled sky. The cabin's windows were filled with an eerie orange-yellow, as if a light or fire was glowing within. Next to the cabin stood 5 stick-figure boys drawn in black crayon, hand in hand. Nolan's heart began to hammer in his chest. 5 brothers. And just visible in the cabin's open doorway was another figure, a tall, misshapen outline shaded heavily in coal black. "Look, Daddy, look what I drew," Tyler said, beaming with pride, oblivious to his father's sudden pallor. "That's a spooky cabin in the woods. Those kids are my new friends inside." He pointed to the 5 figures. "They live there and they want me to come play with them." He then pointed to the dark figure in the doorway. "That's their other friend. He watches over the cabin." Tyler's voice was cheerful, the way only a child's can be, but his words made Nolan's blood run cold. Nolan managed to stammer out praise for the drawing, his mouth dry and his mind racing. That night, after Tyler was fast asleep, Nolan sat alone at the kitchen table with the drawing spread out before him. His hands trembled as he studied it in the harsh light of a single lamp. Every detail was painfully familiar. The number of trees around the cabin, the way the orange crayon was layered to mimic a flickering glow, even the slant of the cabin's roof matching the ruin etched in Nolan's memory. At the top of the page, in Tyler's clumsy handwriting, was the title, "My New Friends Inside." Nolan's breath shuddered out. How could his 6-year-old know anything about that night? A low rumble of thunder echoed outside, and for a moment Nolan thought he saw a tiny spark of orange light between the dark trees at the edge of his yard. He closed his eyes, heartbeat thudding in his ears. In that instant, he understood the truth he'd been avoiding for years. Some stories never truly end, and some horrors, once unleashed, will follow you wherever you go. As he gently folded Tyler's drawing with reverent dread, Nolan realized that the nightmare of the lost cabin was far from over. Some places vanish for a reason, but not all who enter are lucky enough to leave. For the brothers, the nightmare ended with splinters and screams, but nightmares have a way of finding their way back, and when the past sketches itself into the hands of the next generation, the door opens again. Some cabins are meant to stay lost,
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.